Assalamu alaikum students. Today our topic is in the Islamic psychology, Ibne Sina, AlGhazli and Ashraf thanv. We have to study all of three because they are the Muslim psychologists who have done the work in the Islamic area of psychology in the mental health and mental illness. So the first is Ibne Sina. Ibne Sina was born in 1980 century in the village of Sina near Bukhara. In Muslim psychology and the neuroscience, Ibn Sina was a pioneer of neuropsychiatry. He first described numerous neuropsychiatric conditions including hallucinations, insomnia, mania, nightmare, melancholia, dementia, epilepsy, paralysis, stroke, vertigo, and tremor. Ibn Sina was also a pioneer in psychophysiology and psychometric medicine. Ibn Sina also proposed the humans have 7 inner senses to complement the outer senses. In the long history of psychology, this was one of the first attempts to try to understand the way that the mind and reasoning operate. Common sense, this sense collates the information gathered by the external sense. Retentive imagination, this sense remembers the information gathered by the common sense. Compositive animal imagination, this sense allows the animals to learn what they should avoid and what they should actively seek in their natural environment. Compositive human imagination, this sense helps humans to learn what to avoid and what to seek in the world around them. Estimative power, this is the ability to make innate judgments about the surroundings, environments, and determine what is dangerous and what is beneficial. For example, an innate and instinctual fear of predators would fall under this sense. Memory, the memory is responsible for remembering all of the information developed by the other senses. Processing, this is the ability to use all of the information and is the highest of the 7 internal senses. He recognized physiology, psychology in the treatment of illness involving emotions and developed a system for associating changing in the pulse rate with inner feelings, which is seen as an anticipation of the word association test attributed to Carl Jung. Ibn Sina noted the close relationship between emotions and the physical conditions and felt music had a definite physical and psychological effect on patients. Ibn Sina ने ये क्लोज रिलेशन फाइंड आउट किया कि जो इमोशंस हैं और जो फिजिकल कंडीशंस हैं उनका क्लोज रिलेशन है. डेफिनेटली जब हमारी कोई भी फीलिंग्स होती हैं, इमोशंस होते हैं, तो हमारी फिजिकल चेंजेस भी डेफिनेटली होती हैं. तो यहाँ पर इन्होंने कहा कि जो फिजिकल और साइकोलॉजिकल इफेक्ट हैं पेशेंट्स में वो देखने को मिलते हैं, वो होते हैं ऑब्जर्वेशन में. ऑफ द मैनी साइकोलॉजिकल डिसऑर्डर्स दैट डिस्क्राइब्ड इन द कुरान in the Qanun, one is unusual interest, love sickness. Ibn Sina is reputed to have diagnosed this condition in a prince in Jurjan who lay sick and whose malady had baffled local doctors. Ibn Sina noted a fluttering in the prince's pulse when the address and name of his loved were mentioned. The great doctor had a simple remedy: unite the suffer with the beloved. तो इन्होंने इब्न सीना ने ये भी डायग्नोज किया कि जो कंडीशन है प्रिंस की, जॉर्जान की, वो किस वजह से हुई कि उनकी लव की वजह से हुई है. तो इब्न सीना के ये सारे वर्क हैं कि उन्होंने कॉमन सेंस पे काम किया, रिटेंटिव इमेजिनेशन पे काम किया, कंपोजिटिव एनिमल इमेजिनेशन पे और ह्यूमन इमेजिनेशंस पे, एस्टिमेटिव पावर पे, मेमोरी एंड प्रोसेसिंग पे, इनके सारे काम हैं. ये ना सिर्फ एक साइकोलॉजिस्ट थे, साइकेट्रिस्ट थे, बल्कि फिजियोलॉजिस्ट भी थे जो कि 1980 सेंचुरी में पैदा हुए. अफशाना जो कि एक गांव है जो बुखारा के करीब, वहाँ पर उन्होंने बहुत सारी फील्ड में काम किया. डेट आर मैंशनड हियर: हेलुसिनेशन, इंसोमेनिया, मैनिया, नाइटमेयर्स, मेलनकोलिया, डायमेंशिया, एपिलेप्सी, पैरालिसिस, स्ट्रोक एंड वर्टिगो एंड ट्रेमर. इन सब पर इनका वर्क है जो कि साइकोफिजियोलॉजी और साइकोमेट्रिक मेडिसिन पे भी ये पायनियर के तौर पे इब्ने सीना ने वर्कआउट किया। फिर आ जाते हैं इमाम गज़ाली। इमाम गज़ाली जो है इन इस्लामिक साइकोलॉजी में, इमाम गज़ाली डिस्कस द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ द सेल्फ एंड द काजेज ऑफ इट्स मिजरी एंड हैप्पीनेस। ही डिस्क्राइब द सेल्फ यूजिंग 4 टर्म्स। इन्होंने कहा कि जो सेल्फ है वो यूज़ करती है 4 टर्म्स, कल्ब यानी हार्ट, रूह यानी स्पिरिट, नफ्स यानी सोल एंड अकल यानी इंटेलेक्ट। ये 4 चीज़ें जो हैं वो डिस्क्राइब की हैं सेल्फ के हवाले से और वो चीज़ें जो यूज़ की जाती हैं। ही स्टेटेड द सेल्फ हैज़ एन इनहेरेंट yearning for an ideal which it strives to realize, and it is endowed with qualities to help realize it. He further stated that the self has motor and sensory motives for fulfilling its bodily needs. He wrote that the motor motives comprise of propensities and impulses, and further divided the propensities into 2 types, appetite and anger. He wrote that appetite urges hunger, thirst, and sexual craving, while anger takes the form of rage, indignation, and revenge. He further wrote that impulse resides in the muscles, nerves, and tissues and moves the organs to fulfill the propensities. AlGhazli was one of the first to divide the sensory motives, apprehensions into 5 external senses. इन्होंने 5 senses में divide किया sensory motives के hearing, sight, smell, taste and touch में, यानी जो 5 senses जो हमें पता है वो 5 internal senses, common sense, imagination, reflection, recollection and the memory. जो 5 internal senses हैं उसमें common senses है जिसमें which synthesize sentient impressions carried to the brain while giving meaning to them. Imagination जो कि which enables someone to retain mental image from experience, के आप किसी भी चीज़ का जो image बनाते हैं mentally वो होता है reflection, which brings together relevant thoughts and associates or disassociates them as it considers, but it has no power to create anything new which is not already present in the mind. Recollection, the 4th one is which remembers the outer form of objects in memory and recollect the meaning. And the last and 5th one is the memory, hafiza, where impressions received through the senses are stored. He also wrote that while the external senses occur through specific organs, the internal senses are located in different regions of the brain, and discovered that the memory is located in the hinder lobe, imagination is located in the frontal lobe, and the reflection is located in the middle folds of the brain. He stated that these inner senses allow people to predict future situations based on the way that they learn from past experiences. और वो यही कहते थे कि जो इनर सेंसेस है ये अलाउ करती हैं लोगों को कि वो प्रिडिक्ट कर सके अपने फ्यूचर के बारे में, फ्यूचर सिचुएशन के बारे पे, किस बेस पे, अपन जो पास्ट एक्सपीरियंसेस हैं उनकी बेस पे जो इनकी ये सेंसेस हैं, इंटरनल सेंसेस हैं। और ये कहाँ कहाँ पर होती हैं कि जो इमेजिनेशन की होती है वो फ्रंटल लोब में होती है, मेमोरी की जो है वो हाइंडर लोब में है, और रिफ्लेक्शन की मिडल लोब में पाई जाती है। जो The revival of religious sciences, he writes that the 5 internal senses are found in both humans and animals. वो ये भी कहते हैं कि जो 5 सेंसेस हैं ये ना सिर्फ इंसानों में बल्कि एनिमल्स में भी ये पाई जाती हैं। In Mizan al-Amal, however, he later states the animals do not possess as well developed reflective power, and argues that animals mostly think in terms of pictorial ideas in simple way and are incapable of complex association and dissociation of the abstract ideas involving in reflection. He writes that the self carries 2 additional qualities which distinguish man from animals, enabling man to attain spiritual perfection, which are akal, intellect, and the irada yani will. He argues that the intellect is the fundamental rational faculty which enables man to generalize and form concepts and gain knowledge. ये कहते हैं कि इंसान और जानवरों में जो फ़र्क है वो है अकल और विल का, इरादे का, यानी अकल इंटेलेक्ट, और जो इंटेलेक्चुअल जो एबिलिटी है इंसान में वो उसे डिस्क्रिमिनेट करती है एक मैन को एनिमल से, और उसकी विल वो उसे डिस्क्रिमिनेट करती है। आल्सो ह्यूमन विल and animal will are both different. He writes the human will is conditioned by the intellect, and animal will is conditioned by anger and appetite, and all these parts control and regulate the body. He further writes the qalb, heart, controls and rules over them, and that it had 6 parts: appetite, anger, impulse, apprehension, intellect, and will. He stressed that humans have all 6 of these traits, while men only have 3: appetite, anger, and impulse. This was in contrast in other ancient and medieval thinkers and such as Aristotle and Ibne Sina, Roger Bacon, and Thomas Aquinas, who all believed that animals cannot become angry. AlGhazli writes the knowledge that knowledge can either be innate or acquired. He divides acquired knowledge into phenomenal or material world and spiritual related to God and soul, and divides acquired knowledge into imitation, logical, reasoning, contemplation, and intuition. He also argues that there are 4 elements in human nature: the sage, intellect and reason; the pig, lust and gluttony; the dog, anger; and the devil, brutality. He argues that the latter 3 elements are in conflict with the former element, and that the different people have such parts in different proportions. AlGhazali divides the nafs into 3 categories based on the Quran: nafs amara, which exhorts one to freely indulge in gratifying passions and instigates to do evil; nafs lavama, which is the conscious that directs man towards right or wrong; nafs mutmaina, which is a self that reaches the ultimate peace. As an analogy between psychology and politics, he compares that the soul so to that of a king running a kingdom, arguing that the bodily organs are like the artisans and workers. Intellect is like a wiser, desire is like a wicked servant, and anger is like the police force. He argues that a king can correctly run the state of affairs by turning to the wiser, turns away from the wicked servant, and regulating the workers and the police, and that in the same way the soul is balanced if it keep anger under control and makes the intellect dominant desire. He argues that for a soul to reach perfection, it needs to evolve through several stages: sensuous, like a moth which has no memory; imagination, lower animal; instinctive, higher animal; rational, animal stage, and apprehends objects beyond the scope of his senses; divine, apprehends reality of spiritual things. He also stated that there are 2 types of disease: physical and spiritual. He considered the latter to be more dangerous, resulting from ignorance and deviation from God, and listed the spiritual disease as self contradictiousness, addiction to wealth, fame and social status, and ignorance, cowardice, cruelty, lust, doubt, malevolence, calumny, envy, deception, and greed. To overcome these spiritual weaknesses, AlGhazali suggested the therapy of opposite, use of imagination in pursuing the opposite, such as ignorance and learning, or hate and love. He described the personality as an integration of spiritual and bodily forces, and believed that integration of spiritual and bodily forces, believeness, closeness to God, is equivalent to normality, whereas distance from God leads to abnormality. AlGhazali argued that human beings occupy a position midway between animals and angels, and his distinguish or differentiate quality to knowledge. He argues that a human can either rise to the level of the angels with the help of knowledge, or fall to the levels of animals by letting his anger and lust dominate him. He also argued that ilm al batin Esotericism is forward and advised tazkiyah enough self-purification. He also noted that the good conduct can only develop from within and does not need total destruction of natural propensities. Third one is Ashraf Ali Thanvi, physician of the Muslims, Hakimul Ummat and reformer of the nation, Mujahidul Millat, physician of Muslims हैं ये और reformer of the nation है. Thanvi is a reformer of the masses and exemplary spiritual guide, a successful author, a spiritual jurist and intellectual sage and a fortifier of Islamic tradition. The most famous books of Ashraf Ali Thanvi include of famous Behishte-Zevar and the Tarbiyatul Shalik. His views are identified by the three titles: personality theory, causes and classification of disease, treatment or therapies. Personality therapies. In personality therapies, according to Thanvi, a child born with innocent nature. He learns good and bad things from his environment. Definitely, एक बच्चा जब पैदा होता है तो वो innocent होती है उसकी नेचर, वो अपनी कहाँ से चीज़ें सीखता है, अपने environment से. तो 3 टाइप्स ऑफ जो नफ्स हैं वो डेवलप करती हैं पर्सनैलिटी को. नफ्स से अम्मारा, टर्निंग टू इवल यानी बुराई की तरफ जाना, नफ्स से लवामा, कर्शिंग आफ्टर सिन, और नफ्स से मुतमईना, फॉलोइंग डिवाइंस. Causes and classification of disease. Maulana Ashraf Ali Thanvi explains the causes of mental disease as follows. Causes: when a human being becomes detached from religion and goes away from God, it makes him worthless. This also removes distinction between good and bad. Greed and material gain become all important goal of one's life in the world. This worthy gain and greed expose one to mental disease. According to the Maulana, there are 2 forces within a human being: constructive force and the destructive force. He lays great emphasis on training of the child so as to strike balance between the 2 forces, the constructive force and the destructive force. In the early days, parent, especially mother, plays greater role while bringing up the child on right lines. Wrong training spoils him, making him prone to mental disease. यानी ये कहते हैं कि जो डिजीज़ की काज बनती है वो क्या बनती है कि बच्चे की माँ ऐसी तरबियत करे कि उसको बुराई से बचाए और अच्छाई की तरफ ले जाए. यानी कंस्ट्रक्टिव फोर्स उसमें होनी चाहिए एज अ ह्यूमन बीइंग, ना कि डिस्ट्रक्टिव फोर्स हो और वो चीज़ें उसे बुराई से बचाएं. काइंड्स ऑफ मेंटल डिजीज़. मौलाना अशरफ अली थानवी डिवाइडेड द मेंटल डिजीज़ 2 कैटेगरीज: ऑर्गेनिक एंड फंक्शनल डिस्टर्बेंस और disease. The organic disease may be cured by medicines, but the functional or psychological disease are to be cured by individual and group therapies. 2 types of disease: organic and functional. Organic जो therapies disease होती हैं वो मेडिसिन से ट्रीटमेंट होता है उनका, और जो फंक्शनल डिस्टर्बेंस हैं, फंक्शनल डिजीज़ हैं, उनका किससे ट्रीटमेंट होगा? इंडिविजुअल और ग्रुप थेरेपीज है. इन द इंडिविजुअल थेरेपी the disturbed individual is made to understand his own self, known as right path. Maulana Thanvi cured thousands of persons suffering from organic and functional disturbance through his therapy. He simply provided the reading material and inspired the individuals to develop as insight to communicate with Allah directly. वो इस तरह से ट्रीटमेंट करते थे कि लोगों को इंसाइट प्रोवाइड करते थे कि वो डायरेक्टली अल्लाह से कम्युनिकेट करें. फॉर द ग्रुप थेरेपी, मौलाना Thanvi invited his patients to his khanka to stay with other members of the group and assigned them different responsibilities. As they lived together in a group, they were trained and guided to live a normal life. और ग्रुप थेरेपी में ये होता था कि दूसरे लोगों के साथ वो उनको मेंबर्स बना दिया जाता था. जो उनकी खानका थी वहाँ लोगों को असाइन दिए जाते थे, टास्क दिए जाते थे, रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटीज़ दी जाती थी और वो उनको ट्रेनिंग दी जाती थी और गाइड किया जाता था. इस तरह से उनकी वो करेक्शन हो जाती थी. थानवीज थेरेपी अप्रोचेज. थानवी बिलीव्ड इन इंडिविजुअल पोटेंशियलिटीज़ एंड क्वालिटीज़ ऑफ human beings. Before asking an individual to come down for therapy and treatment, he made it absolutely clear that his therapeutic techniques do not lead to the following: miracle and kashaf, guarantee for forgiveness on the day of judgment, promise of material gain or better prospects in life, automatic cure through counselor's attention, possibility of action without will, promise or surely for inner experiences. Maulana Thanvi emphasized the importance of the patient's own will and effort in the cure disease. Automatic cure through counselor's attention, possibility of action without will, promise or surely for inner experiences. Maulana Thanvi emphasized the importance of the patient's own will and effort in the cure of disease or illness. The counselor only assists the patient to understand causes of the disease and overcome adverse factors while organizing his own self. The patient should have full faith and confidence in the counselor and do as advised. Kinds of therapies. Ashraf Ali Thanvi divided his therapies into two kinds: reading therapy, communication therapy. Reading therapy is individual therapy. In fact, at the start of treatment session, Ashraf Ali Thanvi asked his patient to write down his problem, believing that a strong psychological link existed between the patient and the therapist. The association was developed through an exchange of letters. The patient must be conscious of his anxiety and explain his trouble in writing. The therapist believed that some individuals needed direct guidance and counseling. After reading the contents of patient's letter, he put some questions to satisfy and prepare his patient for treatment. More often than not, Maulana Thanvi provided reading material out of religious scholars' book to his patient. He never failed to let those read and received verses of the Holy Quran. Reading therapy depends upon the faith in Allah. Based on Muslim philosophy, the reading therapy believes that man is a whole unit. He has definite purpose of life. He primarily concerns of fulfilling this aim, all directed towards definite goals of life. These are to purify one's soul and seek his pleasure and gratification. And second one is the communication therapy. In the therapy, Maulana Thanvi patients to his Khanka Imdadiya, where people always gathered together. The Maulana used to sermonize on certain topic which the patients had to listen intently and act upon as advised. He thought sermon was the best spiritual group therapy. The patients uttered again and again what they listened. Remaining near to the therapist was important for effective treatment. This way of treatment applied to those who fully believe in religion. Belief relates to purity of thought, uprightness of character, nearness to Allah and commitment. This is our today's topic, and we have to read the Ibne Sina, AlGhazli and the Maulana Ashraf Ali Thanvi.